welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. In recognition of Black History Month, we are going to discuss the future and the continued effort and vital work being done. My guests today are Reynauld Smith, who is the board member of the Sandy Spring Slave Museum, very different from the Sandy Spring Museum. We want to make that differentiation. Honorable Alexander Williams, who's a retired judge, and Deborah Wilder, who is the vice chair of the Commission for Women. Thank you all for joining me. And I wanted to start off with a little bit of history. So Ray, talk to me about your work on the Sandy Spring Slave Museum.
About 3 years ago, I'm a retired educator. I taught high school for about 35 years. And most of my area was in history. And I was fortunate enough to do a lot of courses because I had good principles in African-American history. So when I retired, I basically thought that was going to be it. But then I got acquainted with the Sandy Spring Slave Museum, started helping, and then I was asked to join the board. And that's been for about 3 years now. And during my time there, we have done mostly virtual presentations because of COVID. But on those occasions when it winds down, we do in-person events. Currently, we will accept tours for appointments. If you want a tour, it has to be a private appointment. So we do all kinds of programs from Black Lives Matters to civil rights, the evolution of civil rights movement, the real story about Africa, women's suffrage, and it goes on and on and on down the line.
Well, there's so much history, but you gave me a tidbit that I found fascinating about Juneteenth. Share with the audience about your connection to that history.
Well, little did I know, and I guess everybody else, you would go to sleep one night and wake up the next day and we'd have a new holiday, and it would be Juneteenth. I'm from Texas. Juneteenth has been a part of my family's life for as long as I can remember. I'm the genealogist on my father's side of the family, and the work I've done has led me back to family members in the post-1865 era who were responsible for creating the first Juneteenth. I never knew that. And when I was about 10 or 12 years old, and I used to go down to a place called Comanche Crossing, which is near Meher, Texas. I would meet with relatives and sit around and listen to them talk. Little did I know I was really listening and paying attention, and they were talking about the significance of Juneteenth when I was 10 or 12 years of age, and they were somewhere between 80 and 95 years of age. So that meant, when I did the math, many of my relatives were born right just before the end of the Civil War or right after the Civil War. So Juneteenth has been a part of my family for as long as I have been alive.
That's an amazing story. And the fact that, the connection to the time period, because it's not that long ago. I think people sometimes forget.
Oh no, it's only 1 degree of separation, really.
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Right. Well, I also wanted to welcome Judge Williams. It's an honor to have you, Your Honor.
Thank you so much for being here. Yes.
And so I know that the judicial system, I'm a little biased because I work in there, it has a lot of challenges when it comes to equality and discrimination. And what is your experience? Because you have so much experience from your observations of how the system is working and taking into consideration minorities.
Yeah, well, I thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to be part of Black history because it links the present generation with the former generations, and it instills pride in the importance of Black history. But I served for 20 years, as you know, on the federal bench, and I was itching to get off because I wanted to do some things back out here in the community. But I've been around courts and I've taught law and I've tried a number of cases. And one thing that I recognize is that in terms of the judiciary, the Supreme Court has handed down a lot, as you know, of great historic cases that have been so important to Black history. And in fact, the most important case ever handed down, in my view, in the last century or two is the Brown versus the Board of Education case, because that propelled all of the protests and marches and the other rights that took place in the 60s and are still going on. And of course, I love to talk about gaps, gaps in the education, gaps in health and in wealth and other kinds of areas where there are disparities. So the judicial system is still operating. It's not as I think in terms of the cases handed down now, it's not quite as exciting as the cases that we recall back in the 50s and 60s and so forth. But the federal courts are still there to assist. And now we're seeing more and more in the state courts that's taking on these very, very important issues of civil rights and so forth.
Well, and you see somewhat of a movement to, you know, bring to the courts challenges to voter rights and how election, I mean, I find election law so interesting because when I looked it up in the state code in Maryland, it's very thin. Very thin. And so I think there is room for concern. What do you think?
Yeah, I in fact, I've always told a lot of lawyers, you all need to dust off the state constitutions and start looking at that. I will say, you mentioned the Voter Rights Act. I will say that there are 2 cases now pending in Maryland in the state court that's looking to see whether partisan gerrymandering violates the state constitution, because the federal courts have punted on that and they've decided that it's not a justiciable issue. So it's going to be a lot of exciting cases in the future under the Maryland Declaration of Rights and the Maryland Constitution. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, and I have to admit that you and I are both veterans of the redistricting commissions. I was the chair for the Montgomery County Redistricting Commission, but I know that you were appointed by the governor to do, well, you know, the state redistricting commission. So
that's right. That's right.
That was not easy and quite an education in the process as well.
It certainly was. That's the first time I had been associated with the 10-year obligation to redistrict, and that was a real challenge.
Well, that brings me to a great opportunity for introducing Deborah Wilder. Thank you for joining us. It's tough work. There's a lot of legislative work to be done.
Yes, you're absolutely correct in a lot of different areas. One of the things Prince George's County Commission for Women did last year, we had our very first annual women's legislative briefing. And so the purpose is to look at legislative issues being introduced in the Maryland General Assembly that pertain to women and girls, specifically in Prince George's County. And so we're about to have our second on February the 6th, which will also be virtual in this, you know, during this time of COVID. So we're excited about some of the things we get to highlight, issues of domestic violence and human trafficking. Our overall agenda is talking about the economy and what COVID did to kind of wreck the economy, how it affected women getting back into the workforce. The same with childcare services. Are people going back to childcare, getting childcare services? What are some of the issues? How COVID has impacted that? So we're looking at some of the legislation that's being introduced in the General Assembly, as well as Prince George's County County Council. We know the county executive is really interested in looking at elder care and how that affects our elder population, which of course you've got a lot who are going to be women in that category. So we're looking at that. And many of these issues pertain to women of color disproportionately in our population. So we certainly want to highlight those issues and give people as citizens some idea of what these laws will look like so that they can be informed and involved.
How important is it for the young people to become engaged, more engaged in the legislative process that's before the state or Congress?
Absolutely important. And we are also looking at kind of a teen kind of cohort, if you will, to help them to understand some of this and why they need to be involved and interested early on. You know, you don't wait until you get to college and out, because a lot of what's going on is affecting you now. It's affecting your families now. For example, we did a Census 2020 video, the commission did, and we also did Rock the Vote with young people back in for the 2020 election. So we certainly see the need to involve them early.
How important do you think participation is going to be in the midterm elections?
Vital and key. Vital and key. We've got to keep people interested in understanding exactly what the whole voting piece is and is about, and how it affects you on a daily perspective. You know, we can't just say it's important to vote without really giving them a reason and connecting them, and this is all people, connecting them on a day-to-day basis of what your vote means and why you need to vote and why you need to pay attention to who you're voting for.
And Ray, with regard to Black History Month and the historical nature of the condition that we are in right now in the country, what is your approach towards not just young people, but anyone to become involved in not only just elections, but in, you know, promoting and pursuing equality and diminish discrimination and raise awareness?
Well, that's where I plug in at the museum, and that works pretty well. Even though it's called the Slave Museum, the museum sees itself, number one, as a safe place for all people to come and express their feelings and their views about anything. It's also a place where we express the diversity of the African-American community. And most of the times we think about it in terms of the United States because that's where we live, but all you have to do is go to the high schools and elementary schools. You see all of these people who look like me, but none of them are from the same areas, or their families are from Africa, they're from the Caribbean, they're from South and Central America, they're from every place. So the museum is this safe place for everybody to come, express their points of view, share their points of view, share their disagreements, because we are all in this together. I see this movement of trying to divide people on basic issues. But I listened to Henry Louis Gates just the other day. You know, we're all immigrants in this country. Everybody's immigrants. Even the Native Americans historically are immigrants in this country. So the museum tries to be that place that brings people together, and we're in the process of putting programs together that are of Hispanic origin, Native American origin, African American origin, Caribbean, so forth and so on. And that's what we do. And like Dr. Judge Williams said, one of the problems is we have these gaps. We have these gaps developing within the communities of these ethnic groups of people. Poor Blacks, well-to-do Blacks, educated.
You're muted, Ray.
Poor Blacks, well-to-do Blacks, educated, uneducated, and marginally educated. And this goes across race and ethnic lines. And so the museum sees itself as a place to kind of pull all that together.
Well, that's a great segue, Judge. What do you see about these gaps? What are the things that you think are possibilities for breaching the gaps?
Yeah, well, I want to come back to something that Ms. Wilder said, the importance of voting. And that's so critical. And so many of us, we certainly should be voting, but there's too many not voting right now. And I like to tell people that I know we are complacent. I know we have a nice home, a nice car, we have a job, but we've got to stop the complacency and start addressing some of these terrific gaps out here that still has to be addressed. So for example, again, going back to the Brown case, 1954, and it's over 60, almost 70 years, and they still have not figured out how to give people a quality, equal education. And we've had the Mulligan schools, we had magnet schools, we got charter schools, we got everything, but still people are still segregated. So that's a problem. This health thing is a big problem, big gap right now, because a lot of African Americans and Latinos do not have access to real good health. There are not enough physicians that are out there for the community, for the family. And when you look at this pandemic, it has a disproportionate effect on African Americans and people of color. And so it's just a lot of gaps there, employment, I can go on, but we've got to be able to get some energy out here and not be so complacent and not react to something that takes place, but get involved, have a thirst for knowledge, and understand that we've got to remedy the situation.
What can we do to get ahead of it and not be reactive, but more proactive in trying to bridge these gaps that are so significant? What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Judge. Go ahead, and then I'll ask.
I would just simply say, and I'm going to turn to Deborah because she has some great ideas. But I would just say that people just need to get information. They need to, whatever their passion is, they've got to get involved. And I'll just defer now.
Well, let me ask you a follow up on that. To get involved, many times people say, "I want to get involved, but I just don't know how." What would you say from your experience is a good way to get involved?
Well, you have to learn where the issues come from, find out who represents you, find out what the legislators are doing, both on the county councils as well as the state legislatures, and just get the knowledge. And after that, you'll have a passion and a commitment to move forward on something that interests you, criminal justice or health or whatever.
That's great. And Deborah, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Judge Williams. And I would say in terms of getting involved, find out what organizations, find out when you hear things out, someone's having a forum or there is a chance to go hear someone speak or something that really you're interested in. If you've got children, if they're talking about education, then you need to go listen. And as you listen, find out, well, who is it that's in charge of this? And who can I talk to about making it better, for my child as they're going through school? And it's not just your teachers and your administrators, but as he said, find out who represents you. Call these people up. And those are that's some of the things that we talk about, the legislative briefing, when we talk about, and introduce members of the legislature and the county council. Go to the website if you have access to that. If not, ask someone, how can I get in touch with the person who represents me, and tell them I am your constituent and I have a concern about X, Y, and Z, or I don't like what you did about A, B, and C. These are the kinds of ways that people get involved. And we trying to get the young people, going into the schools and trying to get them to be, and bringing it down to their level, things that they can be interested in so that they can start their work and advocacy and getting involved at younger ages.
I teach some young college students, and one of the reoccurring statements that I get, Deborah, is that, well, no one's going to listen to me. They don't care what I think. What is your response to that?
Wrong. Wrong. If you get enough college students together, enough of them together, make enough noise, they listen. Look at what happened at Howard University. Students came together and said, no, we're not moving until someone listens. And they didn't have any choice but to listen. They didn't want to, but they had to listen. And so those are some, things you can do to get your voice out there. And don't think they're not going to hear you. Make them hear you. There are ways to make people listen.
Ray, what do you think about this?
I think since it's Black History Month coming up, I think it's important to have a basic knowledge of your history and your culture. Again, like Judge said, we're in a situation where it's like history is repeating itself over and over and over again. I was in college in the mid-60s. I was at Tuskegee Institute in the 1965 was my freshman year. So I was there in the middle of the civil rights movement. And eventually I joined SNCC. And the same things we were talking about and doing, voter registration and things like that, here we are again, we're doing the same thing. It may be colored a different shade, it may have different terminology, but it's the same thing. It was gerrymandering, then it's redistricting, and then it may be this, it may be that. And so again, I'm sorry for keep promoting the museum, but the museum serves this purpose. If you do not know what to do and you're interested in doing something, go to the website for the Sandy Springs Slave Museum, see some of the forums that we have, come by and visit, and we can give you things to do, and we can teach you what to do. So I think one thing with young people, I have a son who's 40 years old. I have a son who's 40 years old. College degree, good job, makes good money. And even though he grew up in a family that was very active, he's very complacent because he's comfortable. He's comfortable. And if there's anything that kind of tweaked his attention was the Black Lives Matter movement. No matter where you stand on it, no matter what you think, I think all debates are good, all disagreements are good, if it's done in a fair forum. I was happy to see younger people bring certain things to the attention, where us older people are basically saying, we already know that. Where have you guys been? We've been sitting around waiting for you. These types of things keep going. They have a tendency to kind of peak out, and then, you kind of slide back into that complacency. Whereas in my era, I'm not trying to date you, Judge, but in our era, I looked you up and we were born the same year, so I know what I'm saying.
All right. Yeah.
But in our era, those issues were on the forefront every single day of your life. You turned on TV, it was there. So it just kept you involved and kept you involved. So we really, really, really have to light a fire under our young people. And that's what we do at the museum. We go out into the schools. Schools come to us, especially the high schools. And we share these basic things about history, which I'm still surprised to this day that a lot of kids who are very bright say, I never knew that. And it's some of the most simplistic things in the world. It's not doing this at a particular ethnic group or anything. It's just that they didn't know that. And when they leave with this energy to go out and do something. And if we're not careful, we will stifle this. We have to constantly give them something to follow up on with that energy once we release them from the museum.
I think that's the challenge. Go ahead, Barbara.
I was going to say, may I add, and it's going to get worse, as they are not being taught this stuff in school. And now we're at a place where you have certain politicians and groups who don't want it taught in schools, unless it's taught the way they want it taught, which, that's a whole nother conversation, but yeah, so I think, and I appreciate, what you said the museum is doing in trying to help teach and help learn our history and our culture, and how important it is once you know that.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes young people think they know the history. Oh, I already know it, but There's knowing and there's really knowing. And I'll give you the last word, Judge.
Well, I think that what Ms. Wilder and Mr. Smith have indicated is so important. The museum, we've got to visit the museum. We've got to learn. And again, as Ms. Wilder indicated, the young people have to get more involved. I am encouraged because some of the young people that I've seen into office now and doing other things, they are really impressing me with their commitment and their dedication. So I have some optimism with this generation that's taking over right now.
Well, that's fantastic. And I do encourage anybody who's watching, young, medium, old, to be not complacent, be active and be involved. And if you know of somebody who hasn't been registered to vote or has having trouble getting to, a precinct, or, just doesn't even have much information, share with them, tell them stories, because the more involved everyone is, the better it's going to be for everyone. So we unfortunately have run out of time. I'd like to thank my guests for joining me and the audience for listening to us. You can catch us also on YouTube channel. It's Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow Show. And we're on Facebook. So thank you so much, everyone. Until next time.